Hey everybody, it's time for another wrap up. I've read a stack of amazing books that I cannot wait to tell you all about, so let's get started. Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. It's Russell with Ink and Paper Blog. How are you all doing today? I hope you guys are doing very, very well. Of course, I hope you guys are healthy. I hope you're safe. I hope you guys are not going too stir crazy in this locked down world we live in. Still hot as heck here in Northern California. So yeah, but it's the middle of the work week, so I'm not really doing a whole lot except for working, reading, and talking to you guys. Today we're going to be wrapping up the last, I think, 6 or 7 books that I've read here in 2020. A lot of them are so good. Actually, all of them are so good that I cannot wait to tell you about them. So get out your pen, get out your paper, get out your Goodreads, get out however you keep track of your TBR. If you're so able, please order these books from your local independent bookstore. They will appreciate it. If you are a library user, get your library to order a copy and or a digital copy so that you guys can get your hands on it as soon as possible. So the first book I'm going to talk about is a reread. Now, if you guys have been a member of my channel for any amount of time, you do know that I very rarely reread a book. I have a couple of reasons. One, I'm always worried if I really loved it that it will never live up to that first experience. And two, there are just too many books in the world for me to reread. But this is a special circumstance. I reread Gilead by Marilynne Robinson, and the reason that I reread this is because, for 2 reasons actually. One, they are doing a reissue of the first 3 books in this trilogy that actually just came out. I actually have them ordered from a local independent bookstore, and they are on their way to me, and they are beautiful. And in September, the 4th book, Jack, comes out in this series. So I wanted to reread Gilead and read the series so that I would be ready for Jack. Now, I know that probably a lot of you guys have read this book, but in case you haven't, this is told as a letter from the Reverend John Ames. Yes, John Ames. He is a father to a 7-year-old boy, but he is much, much older than his son and his wife. And it appears that he is nearing the end of his life when the book starts. And he starts to write this letter to his son for his son to read when he's older after he has passed. And what it turns into is sort of a discussion of a father and a son about life, about faith, about love, about relationships. There's some interactions with the neighbors, which and people that he's had, long-term friendships with, their children, and different things where sort of John's humanity comes out, his jealousy, his worries about his wife and his child once he is gone, and what's going to happen to them and what the future holds. And he talks a lot about how his faith has anchored him, his faith has anchored his family. He comes from a long line of preachers, and it's just a book with such a quiet sense of power. The writing is gorgeous. If you guys haven't read Marilynne Robinson, you really, really should. I recommend all of these, and I recommend Housekeeping. I recommend her nonfiction. She is a phenomenal American treasure when it comes to literature. So that's Gilead by Marilynne Robinson. This is 100% out now. You guys can totally get your hands on this. Read the series. I have not read books 2 and 3. They are coming to me, but I know Matthew Sharapa raves about the book Home by Marilynne Robinson, so I can't wait for them to arrive and for me to read them. We are going to take a big turn from talking about a preacher and a letter to his son to the next 2 novels that I'm going to talk about, because they are very, very different. Though those 2 novels, which we're going to discuss, have a lot of similar themes, and I think if you like one, you'll like another. So there we go. So the first book I'm going to talk about is Luster by Raven Leilani, and this is out now from FSG. It came out on the 4th of August, and this is fighting big time as one of my favorite reads of the year. So this is the story of Edie. Edie is a young Black woman. She works in a publishing job, and she has, how do we explain it? That Edie is a very sex positive woman, and she has had a lot of relationships, and she has had a lot of issues with keeping those relationships long term. At the start of the book, we find out that she has been having a conversation with a married man, and they start an affair together, and it sort of rolls into a ball downhill from there. It turns out that the man is involved in a marriage that's decided to become open. His wife is aware of the situation, and the dynamic between him and her is continuously shifting as his wife becomes involved with her. Edie is such a, what is the word I want to look for? Edie is one of those characters that half of the time you are like totally on board with, and half of the time you're like, girl, you need to make some better decisions. However, she is so real and raw and visceral that it's hard not to really get attached to her. I don't think this book will be for everybody, in the fact that there is a lot of ownership of her sexual identity, and I think that we need to read more things like that, but at times it is a little bit brash, and if you blush easily, that will be difficult for you. But I challenge you to read that, because I think that this book and this character represent a lot of young women and how they sort of pivot within the world and the dynamics and sort of what society seems to think of them and what others think of them. Now, this book is really about the relationship she has not only with this man, but his wife and also their young child. I say young child, she's a teenager. I don't know why I said young, because in my head, everyone is young. But she is a teenager, and she is a young Black woman who has been adopted by white parents. So Edie and her sort of develop this connection that takes time, because even the daughter's aware of the relationship and how it all goes. So there is a lot of like awkward tension in the book as well, but it is so utterly brilliant, and it's so hard for me to explain because I really just want you to read it and experience it. I'm going to say this about this book, and I'm going to say it about the next book too. I feel like if you were a fan of Melissa Broder's Pisces, that this book will be something that you can enjoy. I think that there's a lot of similarities with women sort of at times just being a little bit scattered, a little bit all over the place, but really having a sense of purpose and an understanding of who they are, but just trying to figure it out 100%. I hope that does this book justice, because I personally think this book is brilliant. I think Raven is a new voice that I will follow for ages. And I just really want a lot of people to read. I also think if you're a fan, this is sort of like a combination of Melissa Broder's Pisces and Garth Greenwell's books. There's sort of that same sort of meditation on sex and gender that's in his books. I just sort of feel like if you like those type of books, this book will really work for you. So that's Luster by Raven Leilani. This is out now from FSG. Okay, and then we're going to switch into a book that actually, in a lot of ways, the main character of this book, who is nameless, reminds me a lot of Edie and a lot of Melissa Broder's character too. This is Hysteria by Jessica Gross, and this is coming out later in August from Unnamed Press. The reason I was so excited to read this is the blurb on the back says that this is a combination if like Otessa Moffsveg, and I'm saying her name wrong, and Phoebe Waller-Bridge like sort of came together, this is what would be produced. This is another woman who is very sex forward, sex positive, very much knows how she utilizes that in her life, but she has a lot of mistakes that she's made, and she doesn't really have a direction. She goes to her local bar, she meets a new bartender, and her immediate agenda is always to sleep with him and then leave. Both this character and Edie, they struggle with sort of that long-term meaningful relationship and what that is going to mean to them. And what she winds up doing is she sort of obsesses about this man and becomes convinced in her head that he is actually sort of the embodiment of Sigmund Freud. Both of her parents are psychoanalysts, and sort of she knows about Freud, and she believes that he's there now as Freud, and she becomes sort of obsessed with him. This book is a train ride. Like, at times it is just so kooky that you're like, what am I reading? But in the same time, Jessica does an amazing job of infiltrating the mind of this woman and giving you sort of a perspective that is unique to the character, but also very worldly at times. Like, I could just get it. I think that this book just spoke to me, just like the other books I was telling you about. It's like women coming to terms with what it means to be them, but owning who they are in that moment as they figure it out. I really liked this book. I find it much more difficult to talk about without spoiling it, both Lester and this one. So I want you guys to read it, and I want you to email, and I want you to talk to me about it. So that's Hysteria by Jessica Gross. This is out from Unnamed Press, and I believe it comes out I think it comes out on the 18th. Don't quote me on it, but it is the month of August, so you can get your hands on it. Okay. Now we're going to take another left turn, and we're going to talk about a modern classic. This was actually the book club choice for mine and my friend Ryan's Spilling Tea Book Club, and we just had the meeting on it, and you can watch my video down below if this is something you're interested. This is The Street by Ann Petry, and this is an utter masterpiece. The Street is the story of Letty. She is a single mother in Harlem in 1944, who has decided to move out with her son into an apartment on the street, 116th Street. And this book is all about her and her development as a protector for her son, as she tries to find ways to raise him the way that she wants to do. If that makes any sense, because that was an awful sentence. Letty is one of the strongest, most independent women that I have ever read, but this book is about all of ways the world are fighting against her reaching her goal. There are so many fantastic side characters, from her son, from the creepiest character, who is the landlord Jones, who is just obsessed with her in the most unattractive way ever. Chapter 4 is all about his obsession, and I was literally creeped out the entire time. The book talks about race. It talks about racism in America during the 1940s and before. It talks about gender roles. It talks about the options available to Black men and women. And it does it in such a subtle way that it is never preachy. This book is phenomenal, and it has one of the most shocking endings that I have ever read, and that is all I'm going to say about it. If you have not read The Street, please do so. The Street by Ann Petry. This new edition out from Mariner Books has an introduction by Tiari Jones, and it is worth every minute of your time, I promise. Okay. We're going to take a turn now into fantasy and science fiction. No, just fantasy, not science fiction. Because, this has been a very different reading month for me. Now, I want to say that the book I'm about to talk to you about, I thought it was YA. And I went through that whole book, and that was the experience. And I loved it. But when I talked about it or mentioned it on Instagram, I think, people told me that they didn't think it was YA. I don't think it matters, but I'm just saying it out there because I think this is a book that if you have a teenager that likes to read sort of fantasy books, this would be a book for them. And that is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune, out from Tor Books. I adored this little book. So this is the story of, I got to get some names. Linus works for an organization that is out there that goes to these orphanages, and these orphanages all around that he goes to are set up to protect magical children. Okay, and Linus takes his job very seriously. There's a very thick rule book. He has never violated the rule books. He does everything by the book. And he gets a special assignment from the board of his organization to go to a specific orphanage that's in the middle of nowhere to evaluate whether or not what's going on there is accurate. And there are 6 very special, very unique children there. I don't want to spoil anything about the children because that's sort of kind of the fun of it. But what happens is he goes there to evaluate it, and it turns out you learn that sort of the organization has a sinister reason for him to be there. And as he learns more and sort of falls for the children, he also starts to fall for the headmaster. And it has a soft but sweet little romance between these 2 men. A lot of people quoted or told me that they thought that they wanted more romance. I didn't need it. I thought it was very well handled. I thought it was charming, and I thought it was sweet. It's all about these kids and why people have really shunned them for a long time, and what happens when they find someone who's willing to protect them and willing to love them for who they are. And it's just about all these people finding a place in the world where they feel protected and they feel like home. And I adored it. I absolutely adored it. I think you could give this to any 11, 12, 13-year-old, probably even a little younger, and they would absolutely love it. I think as an adult, you will love it. Yeah, it just really pulls all the good heartstrings, and it's a fun story. So that's The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune, out now from Tor Books. Absolutely adored. Highly recommend. Last but not least is a fantasy book that is coming out on the 18th from Saga Press, and that is The Vanished Queen by Lisbeth Campbell. And I'm gonna hold it. I keep saying Lisbeth, and I hear Elizabeth because that is my mom's name, but it's Lisbeth with an L. She's actually from the Bay Area, so someday I hope to run into her. The Vanished Queen is what I guess would be considered a fantasy novel. There is a little bit of sort of magic in it, but it's really a sort of political intrigue novel set in a Games of Thronesy type land. I don't know what to call it, a medieval type land, castles and kings and queens. Basically, it's the story of a kingdom that is ruled by an absolute despot, and everybody wants him out, including his children. He has 2 sons who he has just been awful to. They are sort of plotting against him, plotting to take over. He's ill, but they know that they don't have the power backing to take over when he dies, so there's a lot of political intrigue there. We have the queen who disappeared years ago, who sort of haunts the halls and haunts the stories of the town. No one talks about her in this country, but she's always sort of there. And then we have a young woman who, when she's young and in college, she finds a couple of books that were part of the Queen's library. One is a journal and one is a book of poetry. She winds up joining the resistance, and all of these parties come together. The resistance, this young girl, the princes, and it's really all about how they're all coming together to try to overthrow the king. Now, the king is very savvy, and he has awful people working for him. So there is a lot of stuff that goes on. I never felt like this book was overly complicated. The story has twists and turns, but I never felt like I had to go back and read something else again. I thought the author did an amazing job of making things clear and fascinating and interesting. All of the characters get their due. All of them are well-rounded. There's a little bit of magic. I'm actually hoping in the sequel, I'm hoping there's a sequel. I don't even know if there is a sequel, but in my world, there needs to be. I think there could be a little bit more of that, but that is fine. It did not affect the book at all. This is for those of you that like books that have sort of that medieval twist on it, that like a political intrigue novel, which is really about moving the pawns and pieces of the chessboard within the castle to try to keep someone in power or get someone out of power. There is a sort of surprise to the book that I found very, I just felt like this book worked. Does that make sense? And I really loved it. And I really flew through it, which for a fantasy novel of this size is something to be said for me. Yeah, and I loved it. I really, really did. And I'm really excited to see what Lisbeth Campbell does next. So this is coming out on August 18th from Saga Press. That's The Vanished Queen by Lisbeth Campbell. Highly recommend. Please pre-order. Make sure you know that she knows that I sent you, if you can do that. I hope you guys get all of these books. This is a great little stack of books right here. I hope all of them wind up on your TBR. I hope I did justice to all of them because I really did enjoy every single one of them. As always, if you're a return subscriber, I could not do this without you. Thank you so much. If you are new to my channel, thank you for coming. I hope you subscribe. I hope you hit the bell. I hope you come back for more. As always, I encourage you guys to shop locally, read globally, and until next time, I wish you happy reading. Bye.